Welcome everybody to another episode of Environmental Social Justice. Today we have a very special guest. We have a friend, Alex Cherin from EKA. He is also the head of transport and clean technology for the Port of Long Beach. So welcome, Alex, from your car. Please don't crash.
I will try. Thank you very much for having me.
This is a man on the go. Right
this is a man on the go. And hey,
he's got two big jobs, you know. EKA, a great firm that does a lot here in the city of Los Angeles, and then down at Port Authority too. I mean, we couldn't ask for a better guest.
Well, I appreciate that. And just to clarify, so I am a partner at EKA, and I run the firm's transportation, logistics, and clean tech practice. And then I am formerly the managing director of the Port of Long Beach. So while not officially under the employ of the Port of Long Beach anymore, work there daily, very familiar with obviously the environmental programs, which I think we're going to talk about today, and looking forward to the discussion.
Absolutely. So let's just dive into the transport. So Port of Long Beach, they're huge. And how are they transitioning to renewable energy? Because I've read quite a few articles that is their initiative.
So appreciate that. So just to give you some scale, the Port of Long Beach and the Port of Los Angeles together are about the 4th or 5th largest container port in the world. They handle about 40 to 45% of all the nation's imported containerized cargo. So the way I explain that to people is, 40 to 45% of the goods that you see on the shelves at Target and Walmart and other places come through the gateway here in Southern California of LA and Long Beach. So that hopefully gives you a little bit of scale. Back in 2008, both the ports realized that if they wanted to continue to grow to accommodate all this containerized cargo throughput, that they needed to grow green. And they had a pact and a commitment to their local community and to the state to make sure that they were running as clean as possible. Up until that point, the port ecosystem was very antiquated. There were about 16,000 trucks calling at the port each and every day, most of which were running on old diesel combustible engines. You had container ships at berth for 3, 4, 5 days at a time that were running on dirty bunker fuel while at berth. All of that emitting, pollution into the air here in Southern California. Not good for the basin. So in 2008, Port of Los Angeles and Long Beach embarked on the Clean Air Action Plan, which set pretty aggressive goals. And that's been updated a few times over the last few years. And by 2030, 2031, both ports have a commitment to try to transition the equipment, both the vessel side, so the vessels at berth, and then on the terminal side, so the cranes, trucks, things like that, to a completely zero emission platform. How they get there is a story of, sort of incentives. There are lots of incentives from the state, locally from the air regulatory agencies, AQMD, et cetera, to try to convert some of these, trucks and other technologies to zero emission. And at this point, both the ports kind of have an above check all the boxes approach. So whether it's natural gas as a bridge technology or battery electric as a pure zero emission, they're kind of moving full steam ahead. So I know that's a lot to unpack, but I'll stop there for the moment.
I'm really glad you mentioned that natural gas is a bridge technology, because a lot of people in the transition to clean energy think we can just flip a switch and everything will go over to renewables. We have to transition. There has to be a process. And whether, I support hydrogen, I support biogas, any way to get us to that clean net zero emissions. So thank you for saying that. And I just saw Joy ready to ask a question, so I will shut up and let Joy talk.
Well, no, I was just going to ask Alex about with the clean air initiatives that came along around that time, where like AQMD were providing clean vehicles and clean trucks. How has that really impacted the corridor? Has it really helped out the corridor and the environmental justice communities that surround it? What are some of the statistics around the air cleanup around the port?
So in the first few years of the CAP program, so 2008 to probably 2015, 16, there were gains in the reduction of NOx, SOx, diesel particulate matter in and around the port. each year. In about 2016, 2017, you saw a little bit of a plateau in some of the progress made towards reducing air emissions. And the last air emission inventory, I think that was taken by the ports, it started to creep up a little bit. So in the first few years of the program, I think there was maybe an 80 to 90% reduction in NOx and SOx, maybe a little bit less in diesel particulate matter. And then that's plateaued. And so you've seen incredible gains, and in the last few years, not so much. And so that's really begged the question about, we have reached these incredible milestones with, the technologies that were available in the last 20 years, which was mainly hybrid technologies, natural gas technologies, LNG, CNG, fuel for trucks. But how do we really push the envelope now? So we're sort of transitioning from incentive programs that really incentivize natural gas to those that incentivize battery electric hydrogen platforms. The other piece of that is most of those gains were made in the trucking sector. And if you look at the pie of the air emissions inventory from the port, a vast majority of the emissions come from the vessels. And so we really haven't, touched the surface on how do we reduce air emissions from the vessels that are at berth. And that's, I think, a bigger whale. And I think that's going to be the challenge in the next probably 5 to 10 years.
Yeah, it's funny, some of the proposals that had actually come up around that regarding the vessels. I remember when they were trying to basically put plastic bags over the stacks on the ship, hoping that, they could take take whatever emissions come out of it and put it out further to sea. So like there's some technologies out there that people have talked about, some of them wacky, some of them not, but are they really going to be able to be implemented?
So that the technology you're talking about is a perfect example. That's what started off as, they referred to it as the sock on the stack. So you're exactly right. They would put a scrubber over the stacks on the vessels when they were at berth. There was also a lot of effort early on to plugging in or cold ironing the larger container vessels. And there was lots of money from the state to go towards that, and the ports did a great job of working that those regulatory issues into leases with their terminal operators, so that when vessels were at berth, they had to plug into shoreside power, and that's been successful. As you see this new generation of vessels being built overseas, they're equipping them with more and more capabilities to be able to plug in. So plug-in technology is viable and is here. The sock on the stack technology is viable and it's here. I think the next iteration of that is going to be designing these vessels with hybrid engines that can run on some kind of LNG or CNG while they're at sea. The ports have also been very good at incentivizing shipping companies for what they call slow steaming, or slowing down their engines when they get within a certain distance from the California coastline, which reduces air emissions. So, there's a variety of programs that have proven to be pretty good. But I think the next, kind of iteration again is going to be getting these large vessel manufacturers in Asia, where a majority of these vessels are created, to really equip them from the get-go with engines that you can flip a switch and go to some kind of natural gas alternative, or be more easily available to plug in when they get to berth.
Real quick though, because we try to be all inclusive with the terminology, could you explain what NOx and SOx stand for?
Sure. So nitrous oxide and sulfur oxide are two measures of pollutants that typically come from combustion engines. And so when we say NOx, it's NOx, and SOx is SOx. And I didn't do so well in high school chemistry, so maybe somebody has a better explanation of the chemical breakdown. But the three big metrics that people use to measure air emissions from most port operations are NOx, SOx, and then diesel particulate matter, DPM.
Perfect. Thank you so much. Because we do try to, because this is meant for the general public, maybe people who don't have an environmental background, so they can understand why this is important and why we talk about NOx and SOx and particulate matter, especially with social justice, as Joy brought up. Neighborhoods that are negatively impacted, we call them negative externalities, of that effect of these emissions. So what is the future holding with the transportation, the getting the goods out of the port and further down? Because we know we've had a few hiccups in the past couple months. How is that? I mean, you guys are improving. You guys have done Herculean events to get those goods out of there. So I commend you for that.
Yeah, so that still remains a challenge. If you were to drive by the harbor today, Port of LA, Port of Long Beach, I think there's give or take about 50 vessels out at anchor, where typically there aren't that many. And so the immediate goal is really to kind of relieve the pressure on the supply chain and make sure that those ships get processed and the cargo unloaded and off on their way, because that obviously has an impact on the environment. But I can tell you both LA and Long Beach remain committed to meeting their cap goals and making sure that the incentive programs that they've come up with are fully subscribed. I know that the recent announcement by Governor Newsom of the budget surplus in the state of California, I know that he's deploying dollars to the goods movement industry. I know in the Biden infrastructure bill and the Build Back Better bill, there are dollars earmarked specifically for port-related projects, and each of those budget items and the grant opportunities that come out of that will have an environmental component. I know that the state is not going to issue or deploy dollars for port infrastructure unless there's some commitment to employing near zero emission technologies, and I know the same for the Biden administration. So even though people are focused short term on getting the containers out of there, so we relieve the supply chain glut, everybody is still committed to making sure that we follow through with the cap goals.
Well, I think that's kind of an interesting point, because it kind of brings us all full circle a little bit, in that this is always about money. Everything that we talk about, it ends up just follow the dollar. So I think it's great to spend the money to get everybody back onto normal, but what's to prevent this from happening again? Because as you're working to make the environmental side great to get things from the port, if this happens again, we've got another 50, 100, 200 ships sitting out there at anchor that are creating the problem. So how are we going to break this cycle?
That's a great question, and I think from the port's perspective, one of the things that they're doing is, as they negotiate and re-enter into these lease agreements with their terminal operators, which is really, sort of a big carrot and stick that they have. They are making sure that environmental covenants and commitments to the cap goals make their way into those lease agreements. So ports are very much putting their money where their mouth is in terms of making sure that their tenants, and these lease arrangements are typically 30, 40 years in length, making sure that they are committed going forward to meeting those goals.
So say the lease comes together, and about the next 30 to 40 years when the lease is up, are we going to have this problem again as the renegotiations start?
That's a good question. I don't know the answer to that. I think that the technology will evolve in the next 30, 40 years. I know state mandates, federal mandates will continue to evolve too. So I'm optimistic that will not be an issue going forward, but we will see.
I just have to ask, with respect to infrastructure, transportation, getting goods out of the port, what's the initiative with rail? I happen to be a fan of trains and rail, so this is kind of close to my heart. Any progress with that, specifically, maybe even Hyperloop? I know that there was discussions of Hyperloop technology being used.
So rail is an interesting segment of the supply chain, and both the ports have some pretty good incentive programs to get shippers and terminal operators to utilize on-dock rail more for all those dollars that are spent to put containers directly on rail when they're at the terminal. It takes a truck off the road, or the need for a truck off the road, which reduces emissions. So they've provided some financial incentives there. I know that the ports have also deployed some grant dollars to make sure that the large rails, BNSF, Union Pacific, look at integrating cleaner engines as they build new locomotives and they come online. So I think that the ports have been good about incentivizing the rail segment as well. Yeah.
Wow, that's fantastic. I love hearing that. Joy, I'm going to defer to you on respect to policy, since that's your expertise. Any questions regarding forward thinking?
No, I think they're doing all the port itself is doing a lot as far as air management, working with all of the ocean groups to make sure that wildlife is safe and sustainable at the same time. But the main thing would be the trucking, and I know AQMD has given a lot of large trucking companies, like our good friend Wendy Sugar, when she was at Ryder, got $20 million to replace, a good portion of their fleet. So
yes,
one of the main things that can be done at this point is to make sure that all of the vehicles, whether it's the vessel itself or whether it is the trucking that comes along with it, is clean. That's the only way we're going to get to 2035. Wouldn't you say, Alex?
I agree, and I go back to trucks have been sort of the low-hanging fruit, because we see them. They're like I said, there's 16,000 that call at the port any given day, and so that's kind of the low-hanging fruit. But when you look at the total air emission pie, they really only account for a small fraction of the air pollution related to port activity. A majority is the vessels and some of the terminal equipment. So you're absolutely right. There's been a lot of focus on trucks because they're sort of easy to regulate and we see them. And but if we really want to tackle this problem, you need to address all segments of the supply chain. So you're absolutely right.
Love that. Well, I will let you go because you're driving, and I just don't want you being too distracted.
I appreciate it.
Alex is a multitasker. He gets a lot done in this city.
Yeah.
And kudos, Alex, to you and EKA for bringing on Kelly Hawkins. That's a huge announcement, not just in minority communities, but she's a great consultant. Our family does a lot in the city of Los Angeles and in the state of California. So I look forward to learning more about what EKA is doing and you guys taking over the city as far as getting a lot of these transportation deals and things done and done correctly. So
I appreciate that, and we'll pass that along to Kelly. She's a great asset to the team. Very much appreciate that, and thank you guys for the opportunity.
Thank you so much for joining us. Drive safely and take care. We'll see you soon.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye now.